Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our webinar today on the steps of eternity, orchestrating gift agreements with valuing revocable and irrevocable gifts. My name is Jen Lennon. I am a marketing coordinator at Stelter Company. And as an industry leader in planned giving marketing, Stelter is committed to providing innovative solutions and education for all of your marketing needs. We're very happy to provide you with this complimentary webinar today. And as many of you know, we do these complimentary webinars about once a month throughout the year. You can go to stelter.com/webinars to see the full list of our webinars and also access past recordings. The next webinar on our schedule is June 20th. We'll be with Scott Lumpkin, and he will be talking to us about how to learn to speak gift planning. So for today, let's head back to the presentation with Jeff Comfort. He is Vice President of Principal Gifts and Gift Planning at the Oregon State University Foundation, where he oversees and provides strategic leadership to the Foundation's gift planning program. He oversees the staff that assists donors in making deferred, assets-based, or complex gifts to the university. Now, prior to his role, Jeff served 18 years at Georgetown University, where he oversaw university-wide gift planning efforts, which resulted in more than 500 million gift commitments and receipts in his tenure there. Before arriving in Georgetown in 1995, he spent 11 years in Denver, where he directed the planned giving program for the National Jewish Health Organization. Jeff is active both nationally and locally in planned giving professional associations. As a volunteer leader for the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, formerly known as PPP, he served as president in 2000, and he was the chair of the 10th National Conference on Planned Giving in New Orleans. He was also a member of the board of directors for 5 years. Additionally, Jeff was a member of the ethics committee, and he chaired the task force on gift valuation. And on the local level, Jeff is a past president and board member of the National Gift Planning Council of Greater Washington, and he is a founding board member of the Colorado Planned Giving Roundtable. Additionally, Comfort serves on the editorial advisory board of Planned Giving Today. So thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today with your expertise, and we welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. Or good afternoon. Good morning from sunny Corvallis, where the summers are spectacular. Welcome, and I'm glad you joined the conversation today. Now, Jen, I'm trying to advance the slide, and it's not letting me do it.
Well, I will step in. There you go.
There we go.
We'll see how that works for you.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about gift agreements and coordinating those with gift valuation. The two go hand in hand, or they better. First, let's start with what's the difference between a gift agreement and a statement of intent? Well, it's really pretty simple. A gift agreement is a contract. It's legally enforcing a binding obligation on the donor, and a statement of intent says really clearly, or it probably should somewhere in the statement of intent, that this is not a legally binding obligation on me, my family, my estate, or my heirs. Now, for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to sling around the terms gift agreement and statement of intent interchangeably, just because I do that. But let's start with the factoid. Many of us, have worked in the industry with statements of intent now for about 20 years, but that wasn't always the case. Prior to 1996, planned gifts used gift agreements until there was a court case in a private letter ruling from a gift in Arizona where a donor had made a binding pledge for X dollars and fulfilled part of that with an outright gift, and then the donor created a charitable remainder trust and told the organization that was for the remainder of his X binding pledge, and that his charitable remainder trust would be in satisfaction of that. The Internal Revenue stepped in and said, wait a minute, we're not going to allow that. contributions to a charitable trust in partial satisfaction of an individual's and trust's irrevocable pledge to the educational institution is self-dealing under the reg in front of you now. So they disqualified his CRT, and that threw the charitable gift world into a tizzy. It was like a volcano went off. It was, oh my goodness, how can we count or record planned gifts if we can't use gift agreements as we've always done? How can we recognize planned gifts? FASB and generally accepted accounting principles called for some documentation to be able to record the gift, and it took the charitable world about a year and a half to come up with statements of intent. And then the question was, what do we do with existing agreements for planned gifts? And this question still comes up from time to time. Until recently, for instance, with the donor advised fund, if a donor had a gift agreement, legally enforceable pledge, and used their donor advised fund, then a couple of years later said, I'm going to use my donor advised fund to pay off the rest. Most organizations at that point stepped in and said, let's do a statement of intent. All parties will agree to tear up the gift agreement, and we'll go with a statement of intent that replaces that. So that was the birth in about 1997, 1998 of statements of intent. So let's talk about a statement of intent and what are the elements of a statement of intent. It usually starts with positioning the donor and why they're making the gift. And instead of saying, I'm making a pledge to contribute, it says, I'm expressing my intent to contribute. Although I intend to make the gift described above, this document shall be construed only as my statement of intent, and again, not as a legal obligation of me, my heirs, or my estate. So, charitable gift agreements and statements of intent, these are the cornerstone of full disclosure between the donor and the donee being our organizations. And I heartily encourage all of my colleagues to make sure, don't take for granted that the donor has read the statement of intent or gift agreement. Go through it with them, especially some of the areas where they may have questions. Full disclosure is so important. There was a seminal presentation given by Joe Bull about 10 years ago called Good Given Gone Bad. And in Good Given Gone Bad, Joe highlighted about 10 gifts that had gone bad. And he chose 10 really large gifts. For instance, Catherine Reynolds made I think about a $30 million gift commitment to the Smithsonian. Events transpired, and Smithsonian decided to give her the gift that the amount she'd already given back. In all 10 of the Good Given Gone Bad examples, it was either a lack of a gift agreement or a lack of full disclosure and understanding with what the donor and the donee had agreed to in the gift agreement. Now, for current outright gifts, a donor says, look, I'm going to give you $100,000 over the next 5 years, $20,000 a year, and I want it to be used to pay for instance, scholarships in athletics. The gift agreement is really pretty simple. You just delineate the donors and the donee's understanding of the use of the gift. For gifts for planned gifts, it can be a lot more complex. If you look at your statements of intent or gift agreements, all of yours and the ones I've worked with are probably a little bit different, but they should all contain 4 fundamental elements. The first fundamental element is an introductory statement that establishes the donor's background. For instance, I'm looking at one now that says, taking into my interest in Oregon State, excuse me, my phone won't forward. Taking into my interest in Oregon State University as an alumnus, I hereby express my intent to contribute to Oregon State University Foundation approximately 5% of my estate. So that sentence, the positioning statement, the introductory statement, is usually pretty brief, although I've seen them be a page or 2 pages long. I'm working with the donor right now who's making a very large gift for an endowed scholarship fund, and his question was, how are students 5 or 50 years from now going to know, who made their scholarship funds available and who was the donor? So we're working with him to develop a pretty long positioning statement on who he is, why he made this gift, and what his guidance is to future students that will be the beneficiaries of his fund. Second fundamental element, a brief description of the program that the gift is supporting. I intend my gift to be for the Jeff Comfort Scholarship, to be used to support scholarships for construction engineering management majors with preference for those interested in heavy highway construction. So, a clear description of what it is my gift is going to do programmatically. Third critical element, and we'll go back to this several times through this presentation, is the funding information, how the gift is going to be made. It states that the fund won't be established until the gifts reach the amount for the purpose stated in number 2, and it also, if it's for an endowment, will delineate the investment policies and how this gift will be governed and managed going forward. Then number 4, here's another factoid for you. Side-pray language. Almost all of our gift agreements or statements of intent have side-pray language, and if they don't, I would say they probably should. Now, most of the legal phrases in foreign languages that we use in plan giving are Latin-based. This one, side-pray, happens to come from French law, old French law, from side-pray comme possible, which means as close as possible. The doctrine of side-pray says to permit the main purpose of the donor of a charitable trust to be carried out as nearly as possible where it cannot be done to the letter. It allows the institution, if the gift is no longer possible or feasible as described in item 2, the program, to come up with something as close as possible. For instance, when I worked at Georgetown University, decades ago, they had a dental school, and we got a very large bequest in from a donor who, in his will, had designated his gift to be for the dental school. However, the dental school got closed down sometime in the late 80s, I believe. This gift came in well after that, and the doctrine of side-pray said we're going to do something as close as possible. So we ended up designating it to our medical school for mandibular research, and the side-pray language allowed us to do that, working with the executor of the estate and the board of Georgetown without having to go to the court. Side-pray originally was limited to charitable trusts, but now it applies to pretty much all gifts to charitable corporations and other organizations. So your side-pray language probably reads something like, I understand and agree that should it ever become impossible or impractical to use the gift for the purpose specified in the agreement, the board of the charity in their discretion may distribute or use the net income or devote the entire income and principal of the fund to support any other uses most similar to my original interest and intent. So how do we use gift agreements and statements of intent? This is something that I think we've learned over the last several decades, and it's something that I'm always trying to work with and train my major gift colleagues how to best use a gift agreement or for a bequest or other planned gift with the donor. I say, the best approach is a full service approach to the donor. First, what not to do. Knock on the donor's door and say, understand we're in your will. How much is it? And can we get a copy of your will for our records? And by the way, how's your health? The door usually gets slammed in our face, figuratively, if we take that approach, although I still see it with less experienced mid-gift officers and plan giving officers. It's a pretty simple approach. It's what we want. Words matter. Words not to use are, we'd like to count your estate gift. Well, count is development jargon. Donors are, what do you mean we want to count your gift? We want to count on your estate gift. The next one, we want to document your estate gift. Boy, that's like saying, your papers, please. That is for most donors, particularly for estate gift donors, gifts and wills and trusts, way too heavy. Most owners of those gifts are totally committed to their gift, but we want to document your estate gift, and particularly if they talk with their lawyer about that, not going to happen. We want to record your estate gift, or we want to book your estate gift. That's all about us. It's not about the donors, what we want to do. Really, it's about what the donor wants to do. So we'd like to recognize your estate gift. We'd like to recognize the full extent of your philanthropy. We'd like to celebrate your estate gift. Now, 90% of the time when I've taken that approach with a donor, say they've put us in their will for $100,000, and I say, that's great, your lifetime gifts, and now this $100,000 estate intention or estate commitment is really beautiful. Please let us recognize the full extent of your philanthropy while you're still here with us. 90% of the time donors will go, oh, shucks, Jeff, I don't need any recognition. And when they do that, I come back and say, I totally understand. But purely from a marketing or helping us with our fundraising, if you'd allow us to do this, it really adds to your gift. It's an inspiration to others. Members of our community will be so much more inspired to think about doing what you've done if they know that a fellow community supporter has done it than if they hear from Jeff Comfort, fundraiser, saying please put us in your will. So what is our role? It's about helping donors explore meaningful gift opportunities. With a statement of intent, as the donor's thinking about their estate gift, using the donor-focused approach, and I'm here to help you. My primary role is to ensure that whatever your wishes are with your estate gift are understood, and that the foundation will commit to them. Working through a statement of intent, full service, it's all about you and what you want your gift to accomplish, keeps the conversation moving along. And it helps the donor reflect on their thoughts about why am I doing this? What am I trying to accomplish? What's the meaning of this planned gift, estate commitment in my life? Our job is to help the donor understand the clear impact that their gift is going to make. I'm putting you in my will for a $100,000 endowed scholarship fund. Why are you doing that? Well, because when I went to Oregon State, I had tuition assistance, and without it, I probably wouldn't have graduated. Well, let me tell you what your $100,000 gift is going to do, and the meaning it's going to have forevermore for as long as there is an Oregon State University. And it helps outline the action steps. Okay, now that you're working through this, it's time to sit down with your lawyer and get this the way you want it in your estate documents. And so with that, statements of intent can help facilitate closure of gifts. There are different perspectives on counting, accounting, and valuation of gifts. Counting is donor-focused. We're going to recognize the full extent of your philanthropy. Accounting is financial and internally focused. If a donor is 80 years old and puts us in his will for a $100,000 gift, our policies allow us to count that gift, to recognize that gift, record that gift. Accounting does not put it on the books. So counting and accounting resolve over time, but at any particular time, they may be quite different. So we'll put $100,000 of an estate commitment on the donor's record. Accounting puts 0 on their financial statements. When the donor dies and the $100,000 comes in, we use that to match up and close out the $100,000 estate commitment on our donor records, and accounting then puts $100,000 on the books in their financial statements. Valuation is a related but different animal. It's gift focus. So what's the real value of the gift? If the donor gives us $100,000 outright versus the donor that puts $100,000 into a charitable remainder trust, while we may record and recognize both those gifts as $100,000, they're really apples and oranges. The value of the $100,000 outright is $100,000. What's the real value of the donor putting $100,000 into a charitable remainder trust? We'll go into that in depth. And then recognition, stewardship, it's all donor focused again. So time for a few questions. Jen?
Here we go. Your first question is up.
Does your organization count or record irrevocable gifts? A charitable remainder trust, a gift annuity, etc. No. Yes at the discounted present value, whatever that is, or yes at the face value.
We have about 35% of people who have voted, so I'm just going to give you a few more seconds to get your votes counted. And the numbers are still climbing, Jeff, so I'm just going to leave it open for a little bit longer. We're at about 65% of people voting. Okay, we've reached about our max of people, so I'm going to go ahead and close it and show you guys the results.
Interesting. So about half count them at face value. About a third count them at their discounted present value, and I'm going to guess there are different methodologies for figuring that. And about 20% don't count them. Next question, Jen?
Sure. And it should be
okay, a little more complicated. Does your organization count revocable gifts with or without an age criteria? Most organizations that count revocable gifts, putting a gift in a will or a trust or designating an IRA, etc. Most organizations that do that have an age criteria. The average age is 65. No? Yes at discounted value, yes at face value.
We have about 60% voting, and it's still climbing, so we'll leave it open for just a second. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it and show you guys the results. There you go.
So more, about double, those that say no, we don't record those, count those, etc. A small fraction at a discounted value, smaller than for CRTs and CGAs, and about 40% at face value. Interesting. Let's move on, Jen. So the majority of major universities do count bequest intentions. We do here at Oregon State University Foundation, and we did at Georgetown University too. Here, our age criteria is that donor needs to be 70 or older. By the end of our campaign at Georgetown, it was 65. Most institutions with a full-time gift planning program realize about 20 to 40% of their total productivity from planned gifts. On average, it's about 25%. So here at Oregon State University Foundation, If we report, for instance, 130 million in total annual fundraising progress, about 25% of that, roughly 30-something million dollars, will come from planned gifts. 80 to 90% of planned gifts in today's world are simple bequest intentions. Donors put us in their will or trust, or named us, designated us a beneficiary of an IRA. 80 to 90%. So I probably spend over half my time working on planned gifts that are CRTs, funded with real estate, or a gift of real estate, or a gift of an LLC with an LLC in it, something like that. I spend half my time working on those because they take a lot more time, and about half my time working with simple bequest intentions. But about 80% of the gifts I close that are counted towards our fundraising progress are the simple estate commitments. The majority of universities also count CRTs and CGAs at face value.
Jeff, we have a couple of questions just come in.
Sure.
Okay. Robert's asking, to receive about 25% of total gifts from planned giving, what percentage of the staff needs to be dedicated to planned giving?
That's a good question, and it varies widely depending on institution to institution. I think a general rule of thumb is that for every 9 to 12 major gift officers, there will be a planned giving officer. So if we have 35 major gift officers, we're probably going to have 4, maybe 5, maybe 3 planned giving officers to meet the 25% goal. Another question, Jen?
Yeah, one more from Cole. He's asking, what would make a gift agreement enforceable? He's not understanding how they would be enforceable in most cases unless there is some detrimental reliance by the charity or some exchange of value which would undermine the nature of the gift.
That sounds like a question from a lawyer. And, for an outright gift, my understanding is that they are a binding pledge, legally enforceable. For a planned gift using a gift agreement, for instance, a donor puts us in his will for $1 million and signs a gift agreement, then it's a contract to make a will, and that varies state by state. It's a matter of state law on the enforceability of a contract to make a will. For instance, California recognizes a contract to make a will and its enforceability. Oregon generally does not. And even in California, or particularly in Oregon, where generally not, lawyers tell me it's a matter of what consideration the university has provided in exchange for the binding pledge or contract to make a will. I hope I answered the question. So, yeah. Counting bequest expectancies or CRTs at face value, occasionally people will come in and say, look at the planned giving officer on the right, he's just wanting to count the money. It's about slapping numbers on the books. No, it is not. It's about philanthropy. It's about inspiring, philanthropy at its fullest extent. I can think of a situation where we had asked a major donor, the president had asked him to make a $10 million commitment to help kick off a campaign, and the president had asked me for a one-page, very simple, no more than 6 numbers, illustration of a charitable remainder trust to show to the donor, in case the donor said, I can't do that outright. The donor called me and said, okay, here's the deal. You know the president asked me for $10 million. I'm not going to do that. I can't. But he also provided me with an example of a charitable remainder trust. I assume that came from you. That's why I'm calling you. I will commit to $1 million outright as an outright gift or $2 million in a charitable remainder trust. You decide which would you like, and had to say, hey, I can't decide. This is a university decision. Went back to my boss, and he said, okay, it's time for you to write your 6-page illustration of all the different ways that this donor can make this gift. We included bequest expectancies. The donor came back and said, you mean I can just put you in my will for $10 million and you'll recognize that? And the answer was yes. And he said, then I'll do that. About 10 years later, the donor passed away, and $10 million came in. And as I thought about that and the beautiful philanthropy behind it, I remembered the phone call and thinking we could have gotten $1 million outright, $2 million in a charitable trust, which probably would be worth about $2 million today because we've been making payouts and it's been a rough market, or now we have $10 million. So it's about inspiring philanthropy. Most estate commitments are 10 to 100 to 1,000 times larger than the donor's lifetime outright gifts. It's about inspiring philanthropy, letting donors do what it is they're really wanting to do, and recognizing them for that while they're alive. So let's talk about gift agreements and statements of intent and planned gifts. So gift agreements put in place now to fund future needs present special challenges. Many institutions have their favorite horror story about a gift from a trust or bequest where the donor had put it in place and say a specific bequest for $1 million for a professorship 15 years ago, when the donor had asked and we had said our required minimum endowment for a professorship is $1 million, so they put $1 million into their estate and specified that it's designated to create an endowed professorship fund. Then the funds have come in, and now we're having to talk with the donor's family and the estate about, our professorships are now $2 million, so what are we going to do about this? It's really, really in the donor's best interest for the donor and their legal counsel, their advisors, to have a conversation with the charity to understand what the donor's trying to accomplish with their gift. What are the current required minimums? What are they likely to be, at the donor's life expectancy or beyond? And what do we do if the gift comes in and it's not, enough to fund the anticipated program? Maybe the donor put us in their estate for 25% of the residue, and their estate value went down significantly, and the gift is significantly less. This is the best reason why we should all have a seat at the table with the donors and their lawyers when they are planning planned gifts in their estate plans. Often donors will work directly with their advisors, and their advisors say we don't need to have a fundraiser involved. I always tell the donors, your legal counsel knows more than I ever could or should about your estate plans in your estate, etc. My job is to help ensure that what you want accomplished with your gift is understood and will be accomplished, and to contemplate contingencies about what happens if things change between now, either your estate or the university. What happens if things change between now and when the gift comes in? That's the reason we should have a seat at the table when donors are planning planned gifts. So the third critical element common to gift agreements are funding information. Let's have a question on this, Jen.
Here you go.
Should a charity agree to create an endowed fund for a bequest or a CRT funded with the current minimum amount for the endowed fund? So with the example of the professorship, we tell the donor that our current minimum for a professorship endowed fund is $1 million. And if the donor says, okay, I'm going to put $1 million in my estate, should we agree in the statement of intent that we will create an endowed professorship with the donor's gift when it comes in? Simple, yes or no.
This is a really tight race, guys. It's very tight. We have about 45% voting. I'm going to leave it open for a little bit longer. All right, we have about 70% voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close it and share the results.
Oh my goodness, fascinating. About 50-50, but more than half say yes, and a little less than half say no. I can make an argument both ways. For the yes, what I usually hear is, look, we really want to get this estate commitment. The donor is asking for it. If we tell them no, we can't agree to that, then the donor may decide not to make the gift commitment. So let's talk about that a bit. The organizations that I have served for the last 25 years would not agree to that. And we have, in our statements of intent, the donor saying, I understand and agree that all gifts and contribution received for credit to the fund shall be held until the fund reaches the amount then required to establish a named endowed scholarship fund. So if a donor, say, is 70 years old and puts $1 million specific request in their estate plan for an endowed professorship fund, we will tell them that when the money comes in, we will create an endowed professorship fund if it is the amount then required to establish a named fund according to our policies then at that time. And so if inflation goes forward and the donor passes away 15 years later and the endowed minimum for a professorship is now $2 million, it will not be an endowed professorship. For that reason, we always recommend cascading language, just in case the fund doesn't meet the then current amount. So, we'll talk with the donor saying, endowed professorships 20 years ago were 500,000. Today, they're $1 million. There's inflation. We all understand inflation. So if when your gift comes in, it doesn't meet the then required minimum, if professorships have gone to $2 million, then what would you like done with your gift? So if it's not enough for this, the endowed professorship, then that. Perhaps it would be for a faculty research endowed fund in the donor's name. So does the donor's gift meet the endowed endowment or current or future funding requirements is a big question in working with donors on planned gifts and planned for endowments. FASB provides the rules for accounting of planned gifts. CASE and the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners provide standards for counting gifts. And the IRS has a methodology that they insist on donors using for determining the tax deduction for their charitable gift. But accounting, counting, and deduction measurements don't truly reflect the value that the gift is going to provide to the organization when the gift is finally used to accomplish its mission. The valuation standards for charitable gifts goes into exhausting detail on how to value any given type of planned gift. By valuation, what's this gift ultimately going to be worth, and what's the discounted present value for that? So the IRS methodology, we all know that it's a simple two-step process. You suppose a donor puts $100,000 into a CRT. Well, you determine the present value of the income interest to the donor. That's what the Internal Revenue Service calculations do. So they may say the present value of the income interest of this 5% CRT with the donor age 80 is $40,000, and we'll subtract that from the $100,000 they put in, and that gives us the present. We subtract the present value of the income interest from the $100,000, and that's the charitable gift income tax deduction. So many organizations still just use for a present value the Internal Revenue Service charitable gift income tax deduction. Why should we not do that? I'd say because it doesn't measure the full value of the gift to the charitable organization. The gift valuation methodology takes a different approach. It's also a two-step process. It says figure out, project what's going to be the value, the nominal value of that $100,000 gift at projected termination, and then take that projected future nominal value and discount it back to present value. So the first computation is to estimate the nominal future value of the gift. The second computation is to discount that future value back to today's dollars. There are 5 variables that are going to affect the future nominal value of the gift. Of course, the amount contributed, what are the projected investment returns, say, on that $100,000 charitable trust, what are going to be the costs, trustee fees, trading fees, administrative costs, etc. What are going to be the payments out to the donor, and what's the expected term of the gift? Well, it's real easy to figure out, number one, the amount contributed. In the example I've been using, it's $100,000. The invested returns. What's this $100,000 charitable trust going to do in terms of investment performance? Well, we can project the expected returns based on our historic performance of the portfolio that we put charitable remainder trusts in, and use those historical performance numbers to project the future. And of course, our historical performance for our most commonly used asset portfolio for charitable trusts is about 8%. Does that mean the trust is going to earn 8% every year going forward? Nope, and that's full disclosure with the donor. Last year they earned, more like 14%. This year they're actually, just pretty much at flat line. Next year, who knows? But using the historical performance is probably the most accurate method for projecting future results. So again, using the organization specific returns, look at the design of the portfolio and look at our historical historical performance for that portfolio. Once we've identified the expected return, then we can project forward. But what if we're not? What if the trust is being set up with a bank, or the donor's going to trustee it themselves, and we're not going to rely on our historical returns? Well, then we're going to look at the asset mix in the portfolio and use that to help project going forward. So, for instance, suppose the donor says, I'm going to put 60% in stocks and 40% in bonds. Pretty typical portfolio mix. Ours is a little more aggressive than that. So looking at a 60-40 mix and looking at the very long-term average return for stocks being about 9.75%, and then looking at the return of bond class assets being about 3.4%, we can figure out what that 60-40 is gonna look like going forward with projected performance. By the way, for the equity portion, the best indicator of potential projected future returns are very long-term historical averages. For fixed income, this may be counterintuitive, but the best predictor or indicator of fixed income returns are the current interest rates. So about 3.4%, just about the AFR. Why is that? Well, but bond rates are going to go up, Jeff. So yeah, we put 40% in 10 and 30-year bonds. in a projecting 3.4%, if the 10-year bond goes to 5%, sure, it's going to be earning more income, but our investments in the 10-year bond are going to have dropped significantly because face value of bonds move inversely with their yield. So the value of the bond portfolio is actually going to go down, and it's going to have a higher yield, but it's still going to be producing about 3.4% based on the original investment amount. So just quickly doing the math on that, we take 0.6, 60% of the portfolio times 9.75%, 40% of the portfolio times 3.4%, run that calculation out, and we're going to project that this 60-40 portfolio is going to return about 7%, 7.21% on average going forward. The next of the 5 variables are the cost, the trustee fees, investment management, administration, the payments being made out of the trust or the charitable gift annuity or the IRA withdrawal rates going forward. And for the expected term of the gift, we're going to look at mortality tables. What's the income beneficiary's life expectancy? Some will die sooner, some will die later. But the mortality tables are a good indicator of the expected term of the gift. Now, the good news is, back when I first got in this business, and for instance, we did a marketing piece on charitable gift annuities, and everybody said, "Tell me how that would work for me." I had to close my door, put on my green eye shades, sit down with a calculator and notebooks full of IRS tables that were about 5 inches thick, and hand calculate out to come up with the charitable gift income tax deduction, etc. Most software today does that for us automatically. But let's look at, for instance, a $100,000 charitable remainder trust for a donor and income beneficiary who is 72. And we'll see that their charitable deduction is $55,600. So again, that was the IRS saying, take $100,000. The present value of their life income interest is about $44,000. Subtract that from the $100,000 gift, and they get a deduction of $55,000. But again, and many people don't use this. I use PG Calc. Most of the major software will allow you now to discount the present value. And if I discount to present value, and in this case use a discount factor of the AFR of 3.2%, the present value of the gift using the calculations that I just showed you is about $97,000. So almost double what the IRS charitable gift income tax deduction is. Let's look at the detail on this. Well, the trust starts at $100,000. It's paying out 5% to the donor every year. The donor's life expectancy is to the year 2032. The trust will have grown to $151,000 at that time. Discounting, that's the projected nominal value at life expectancy. Discounting that back at 3.2%, use the NCPG, PPP, NACGP valuation methodology would say that the value of this gift is about $97,000. So let's look at a couple of case studies. Ms. Ansbach, age 50, puts $100,000 into a 5% charitable remainder trust. The IRS says the present value is about 50%. Now let's assume Ms. Ansbach is saying this is going to be for the Ansbach Endowed Scholarship Fund. Our current minimum for endowed scholarship funds is $100,000. She's age 50. Well, most trusts grow over time, Jeff, so this is probably going to be just fine. Well, maybe. Let's look at the real value of this gift. The projected future value, if we run it out the way we just did, is the trust will have grown to about $265,000. If I present value that gift, discounted back to present, it's going to be about $93,799, which means I'm going to tell Ms. Ansbach, you know, your gift is probably gonna be enough to fund an endowed scholarship, but it may not. So this is why we have the then current required minimum for an endowed scholarship fund. You know, it's likely that our endowed scholarship funds are going to be $250,000, maybe $300,000, you know, as they go up over your life expectancy. So I always tell donors that sign a statement of intent with the then current minimum language. This is the beginning of the conversation. We need to stay in touch at least every few years, and you know, look at what it is you're trying to accomplish with this gift, and ensure that that will happen. It may mean that you may want to consider adding to your charitable trust or adding to your bequest in your will, etc., to ensure that it comes in at the required minimum. Or at the very least, we should have cascading language. What do you want to have happen if it is not going to meet the then required minimum? Case 2, Mr. White, age 82, says he's put a provision in his will for a specific $500,000 bequest for a named endowed fund. And this is an endowment for a distinguished faculty research fund. Our current minimum is $500,000. Mr. White put us in there for $500,000. And again, it looks like over half of us in this conversation would agree with Mr. White that we will commit to a distinguished faculty research fund for this $500,000 gift. Life expectancy is 8 years. The present value of that gift, if I discount at 3.4%, is about $388,000. Now, what happens if Mr. White lives to be 105 and the distinguished professor research fund minimum is $1 million and $500,000 comes in? Well, if I may, there are a couple of answers to why many major universities include the then current required minimum language. One is, if Mr. White's gift comes in and he lives to be 105 and the minimum for a distinguished faculty research fund is $1 million, if we agree to put $500,000 in it, then let's assume a distinguished faculty member with that $500,000 endowment for a research fund is sitting in the faculty lounge with 2 other distinguished professors who have faculty research funds, distinguished faculty research funds at $1 million. The donor's going to be upstairs looking down, listening on a conversation with a faculty member saying, hey, how come I get the underfunded research fund? How come I get the White Distinguished Faculty Research Fund that's only half of the research fund that you 2 knuckleheads get at $1 million? Mr. White doesn't want to be upstairs forever looking down on an underfunded Distinguished Faculty Research Fund. That's what we need to be talking with Mr. White about up front. So, questions?
Yes, we have some that have come in throughout. You may have addressed some of them already. I'm just going to go ahead and try to get through as many as we can in the next couple minutes. Margaret would like to know, what % of planned gifts do you receive that are surprises to you that you didn't know about?
The majority of bequest receipts that we receive are surprises. The donors didn't tell us. Rule of thumb, long-term, very well-run planned giving programs only identify about a quarter, maybe a little bit more, of the bequest expectancies that are out there. For a number of reasons, donors don't step forward during their life and say, you're in my will. Maybe they want privacy. Maybe they want to keep flexibility and know that they may change. But over half of the bequest or planned gift receipts that we receive come from donors that we didn't know about. Occasionally, somebody will have told us 20 years ago, you're in my will, but in follow-up conversations, they demurred and didn't want to have further discussion about it. So, some of those end up being very big, beautiful surprises.
Sure. Christopher is asking what documentation OSU requires to count a simple bequest. Is it an agreement or an intent?
Oh, my goodness. So we're in a very small core of universities that have a very high bar for counting bequest expectancies. Again, we count them for donors who will be 70 and older by the end of this campaign. We require a statement of intent with a dollar figure in it. And then we require what I call an advisor's note, where the donor's lawyer, typically, maybe a financial advisor, will sign a letter that says, my donor would like to have his gift recognized in the campaign. You're currently in his estate plan for a gift of approximately $100,000. My donor understands that he or she may change their mind at any time for any reason. They'll let you know if they do. And
okay.
We'd also ask for a copy of that portion of their estate plan pertaining to the gift to OSU.
Okay. Ryan's asking how you count bequests. Do you count them at face value or at a discounted present value?
We do both. For all public purposes, we count them at face value if we have all of the above required documentation. Simply for accounting purposes, and they don't go on our financial statements, we'll keep track of the current discounted value. And that would be if a board member says, look, you guys are saying $25 million in planned gifts, what's the real value of those? And we can say, based on our very conservative discounting to present value methodology, it's $19 million.
Okay. I have another question. You mentioned about counting and recognizing donors who make gifts that are 70 or older. He's wondering how you recognize donors that are below the age of 65 that make a bequest intention.
So for those, we will do stewardship. We won't include their bequest intention in our campaign totals. We'll tell them thank you. They're a member of our legacy society. We'll make sure they get commensurate stewardship calls from deans, continued visits, etc. We'll often have a conversation with them, just explaining, here are our campaign policies, and we look forward to the day when we can recognize the full extent of your philanthropy when when your age meets our age criteria. It's not unusual for me to get a phone call from a donor a month before they turn 70 saying, hey, Jeff, you told me, 5 years ago, that you'll include my gift and recognize it and record it. When I reach 70, I turn 70 next month. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah. We are at our time. I'm going to let one more question through. It's from Laura. She wants to know, how would you handle, or how do you handle a planned gift that's realized that the institution never knew about, but it was restricted to a need that no longer exists?
Okay, so what we would do then is probably go back to the trustee, if it's a trust, or the executor, personal representative of the estate, and explain, this was for this purpose. This purpose is no longer, this program is no longer functioning at the university. We cannot accept the gift for this purpose. However, we'd love to work with you on designating the gift for a related purpose. Most of the time, and we'll often include family if appropriate, and the vast majority of the time, everybody will agree, instead of it being for a dental school, it will be for something in the medical school related to dentistry. To go back to the example I used before, now and then, the donor's family will say, gift fails, and, we won't try to fudge it. We're full disclosure. If we can't use it for the designated restricted purpose, we won't accept it and say that we will.
Sure. Okay, Jeff, well, that is our time for today, and I very much appreciate your time and your talent, your expertise sharing the last hour with us, and we had about 300 people logging in today over their lunch hour, so thank you so much for that. I also want to let you know that if we didn't get to your question or if you have an additional question that you didn't send in, Jeff is willing to talk to you about that. His email address is on the screen there. If you have questions about today's webinar, you can get a hold of me. If you have questions about Stelter's products or services, you can reach out to Stella at Stelter.com. You can always visit us at Stelter.com to learn more about our services. Finally, some webinar resources for you. As I mentioned at the beginning, we did record the webinar, and barring any technical difficulties, I will have that posted on our website by Monday. And we'll also have the slides. If you didn't get those today from my email, those will also be on our website at stelter.com/webinars. Again, you will get an email from me letting you know when those are available. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us today, spending the last hour with us. We hope you found it beneficial. And thank you, Jeff, so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.